What do I think of the anti-fascist movement? I think that, as I understand it, they're fighting fascism, and that's a good thing.
That was leftist activist Bill Ayers voicing support for the violent actions of Antifa. It comes as the group becomes emboldened as another scholar gives them more fuel, encouraging them to use weapons in their protests. Trace Gallagher lays it all out for us from our West Coast newsroom tonight. Hi, Trace.
Hi, Martha. Antifa activists maintain when it comes to violence, they are simply engaging in self-defense, though there are numerous documented incidents where Antifa either provoked the violence or, in the case of this year's Berkeley riots, severely beat opposition protesters without cause. And now the anti-fascist group is getting a few pats on the back from influential voices like Bill Ayers, a founder of the Weather Underground, a radical leftist group that in the 1970s conducted a series of bombings, including the Pentagon, U.S. Capitol building, and police stations in New York and San Francisco. Ayers wasn't prosecuted because of a technicality and later became a professor at the University of Chicago. Here's more of his conversation with political commentator Jamie Weinstein. Watch.
It's been documented they have engaged in violence, often unprovoked. Is that something you would support or condemn?
Well, it depends, doesn't it? Because when John Brown invaded Harper's Ferry, unprovoked violence, I agree. I support that. Don't you?
Ayers is referring to the abolitionist who tried to start an armed revolt against slavery. Ayers also condoned Antifa violence by drawing a modern-day parallel, the police shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson. Watch.
The reality is we live in a society steeped in violence. It's steeped in structural violence. And when people stand up and object, then they somehow are the violent ones.
Of course, the Obama Justice Department said the shooting of Michael Brown was justified. Now, Mark Bray, the man who wrote Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook, is on his book tour that Fox News attended, where he appears to be advocating that Antifa take it to the next level. Quoting here, "I don't think it's ludicrous that if white supremacists are carrying guns, that anti-fascists might want to carry guns too." Bray says non-violent resistance to fascism in the past has not been effective. Martha.
Trace, thank you very much. Here now with more, Bill Bennett, who served as Education Secretary under President Reagan and as a Fox News contributor. Bill, good evening. Good to have you with us as always.
Hey, hi.
What do you think about Bill Ayers' comments there, Bill?
Well, they're not isolated. That's the problem. And Professor Bray, who Trace talked about at Dartmouth, not isolated. In the 70s, Martha, before you were born, I was voted one of the most repressive college administrators in the country by a group called the Revolutionary Communist Youth Party. They were very fringe. The problem with Antifa is not just Antifa itself. It's that they're getting some measure of broader support. I noticed the Nation magazine kind of blessed them. Slate smiled on a couple of their violent incidents. And now you have this faculty member at Dartmouth who's all for Antifa. When he gave when his book came out and he gave his interview, the president of Dartmouth, to his credit, said that's not the way we operate. We operate in the marketplace of ideas, civil discourse. Well, 100 members of the faculty at Dartmouth wrote a letter on whose support do you suppose they took? They took the support of the faculty member, not the president. So if you got 100 faculty members at a so-called leading Ivy League university saying, you know, we're with this Antifa guy, that violence is fine against people with whom you disagree, then you've got a problem that is spreading. Not only is the the doctrine noxious, the support of it in some circles is noxious. And what constitutes fascism in their view? That seems to be a creeping definition as well.
It's almost as if they don't need to specifically define it or to say the elements of fascism that they see specifically on the rise in this country. You know, another thing that Bill Ayers said in this interview was, well, it's because fascism is on the rise in this country. White supremacy is on the rise. The Ku Klux Klan is on the rise. The Nazis are on the rise, he says. And then you've got this comment from an ESPN reporter, anchor, Jamele Hill. Let's put up what she said. Donald Trump is a white supremacist who largely surrounded himself with other white supremacists. And here's the ESPN statement on this. The comments on Twitter from Jamele Hill regarding the president do not represent the position of ESPN. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, two things or three things. One, the ESPN has got a problem here. I don't know this woman at all, but ESPN is getting more and more into social and political commentary. You remember this is the company that, ridiculous as it may seem, said a man named Robert Lee couldn't do the football game at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville because of his name. He's an Asian. This is the company that fired Curt Schilling, the Red Sox pitcher, because he said, I think boys ought to go to boys' rooms, girls ought to go to girls' rooms. But on this one, they just said she made an error. But again, she talked about Donald Trump being a white supremacist. Put the two stories together, Martha. If he's a white supremacist and all those around him are white supremacists, according to the doctrine of Antifa, violence can be used. And indeed, violence can be recommended. I have a program recommendation for you. Can I give it to you?
Absolutely.
I think this is a great opportunity for Fox Sports 1 to jump into sports programming. My wife, who's just a few feet away from me, will tell you on weekends I spend more time with ESPN than I do with her, and to my regret. But I am a football nut. But ESPN has so much of an overload of this political stuff that those of us who are watching, and I don't believe it's a lot of Antifa people who are watching, yearn for another place to go. Please, I volunteer to be the Lee Corso of the Fox Sports 1. Do you know who Lee Corso is?
No, tell me.
Martha? Now, see, functional illiteracy, Martha. He is one of the hosts on College Game Day. He's a former football coach. But there's a serious point here. Why is ESPN mucking things up with all this political agenda when the people who tune in and watch it are males, 18 to 55, a great demographic. They buy a lot of beer, they buy a lot of pretzels, and they love their sports.
Yeah. Well, their interest in freedom of speech is limited, apparently. We got to go. Bill Bennett.
Absolutely. But we got to watch the encroaching definition of white supremacy. That's going to be the real problem.
I totally agree. Bill Bennett, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. We'll join you for some football next time.
Thank you,
Martha. Good to see you. So there is dramatic new fallout tonight after a Democrat attacks one of the most revered generals of our time. You don't want to miss what General John Kelly has now said about Congressman Louis Gutierrez, who called him a disgrace to the uniform. Plus, breaking tonight, the Supreme Court has just handed President Trump a win on the travel ban, but we need to iron all this out and figure out where this is headed. Who better to do that with us than Judge Andrew Napolitano, who joins us to explain it all on The Story, coming up next.